Wes, you want to throw the presentation up?
I can do that. There we go.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second open house of the day for the new tiny zoning bylaw. We're just, we'll give it a couple minutes or maybe a minute or two as the participants start to join the meeting. Thank you. Looks like we still have a few folks joining, so we'll just give it another minute. Okay, it looks like our participant numbers have stabilized for the time being. So thank you, everybody who's joined us this evening for our second virtual open house related to the new tiny zoning bylaw. We're going to start off today with a presentation, walking everybody through how the interactive zoning map works to find the zoning of a property, and then a presentation of the highlights of the changes, and then we'll get into questions and answers. So just want to introduce the project team. I'm Shyam Prasad, Director of Planning and Development with the Township of Tiny. With me from Tiny is also Sandra Matson, our planner, Robert Scazzaro, our GIS IT specialist, and Pamela Zimmerman, our planning administrative coordinator. That's the Tiny team as well. We also have Mr. Wes Crown and Mr. Jamie Robinson from MHBC Planning, who are our consulting team, who have prepared the bylaw and leading the project. So I've kind of already spoken about the presentation. We're going to review how to view the new zoning bylaw. We're going to walk through the key directions in the new bylaw, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments. So with that, this virtual open house regarding the new zoning bylaws pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act, the township has identified, or the township and council has identified community consultation and participation as key priorities for this project. All participants are expected to adhere to the following governing principles and guidelines tonight. Statutory public open house will maintain a welcoming, inclusive atmosphere at all times, regardless of any individual's perspective. All participants will be treated with respect and courtesy. The focus will remain on principles before personalities. It's going to be a 1-hour session. If we go over because of questions, we can definitely accommodate that. Comments and questions will be accepted during the open house solely through the Zoom question and answer function, and oral responses will be provided. So at the bottom of your tablet or computer, you'll see a Q&A. Just click on that and you can type in the questions and we'll read each one and answer them. The open house will be chaired by myself, and every effort should be made to keep the questions and comments on topic of the new zoning bylaw specifically. That's why we're here tonight. Questions and comments that fall outside of the scope of the bylaw may not be answered. Questions and comments will be read out loud, followed by an oral response. Every effort will be made to address each question. If resources are needed in providing response, a link can be provided in the written response area of the question and answer feature. Where we don't have all the relevant information at hand, or a longer answer needs to be provided, or we need to dig a little deeper to get a proper answer for you, we'll be asking you to email your question to our project email address, newzoningbylaw@tiny.ca, so that we can provide a more thorough response. So with that, I can walk everybody through the interactive zoning map. Wes, if you can stop sharing for a moment, I can share my screen. Perfect. So the interactive zoning map that we have, where you can find the zoning of a property, is available on the Township of Tiny webpage. So this is the homepage, www.tiny.ca. So if you just put your cursor over business and development and then click on planning and development, that'll take you to the planning and development homepage. And this icon here is the new zoning bylaw, the link to the new zoning bylaw project page. On that. So here's the new Tiny zoning bylaw project page. All of the most up-to-date information relative to this project that's kept on this one page. And specifically with regards to the open house, we have 3 links in this box here: notice of the open house, the draft new zoning bylaw text, and we'll be referring to this document through the presentation. This is the actual text of the bylaw that provides all the key regulations related to the zoning bylaw itself, the actual document. And this is what I want to feature, the new interactive zoning map. So I'm just going to click on this. And here's the new Tiny zoning interactive map. So there's a number of ways you can search for a property. You can type in the address, or if there is no address, in the case of a vacant lot, for example, you can type in the roll number. That's the long number on that you'd find on your tax bill that starts with 4368. So I'm just gonna type in the Township of Tiny municipal building address here. That's 130 Palm Beach Road West, and you can see that that as you type in the address, it will automatically come up. So I'm just going to hit enter. And there we go. It highlights the property. It shows the municipal address, if there is one. In this case, 130 shows the street. And if you zoom in, you can see that the property zoning is I, which in this case is institutional. And if you're not sure what the zone code means for a property, just looking around, you can see an RU here, or a GL, or an RR. All that information is found in the text document of the zoning bylaw. So you can also scroll around, and we can see here there's some colors as well on this interactive map. So I'm just going to go over to here to where it says layers, click on that, and I'm just going to open up these different layers, then we can see what these colors are. So I'm just going to click on this plus button, open all these up. So this lighter red color, you can see here that it refers to the Nipissing Ridge overlay, and Wes and Jamie will be touching on that in the presentation, and all the information, like I said, is in the text of the bylaw. And then over here in Perkinsfield, we have a wellhead protection overlays. So we can see what these different codes are, and these all correspond in the actual text bylaw, as well as over here, this purple color is the Huronia Airport overlay. And you can also scroll around and find the zoning of a property just using the map. So in this case, I'll just click on Perkinsfield Park. And if I zoom in, I can see it's zoned OS, which in the case of this property is open space. And the address of the property will actually come up with the roll number. So that's how the zoning tool works when you're trying to find out what is the zone, what is the new zoning of my property. So with that, I will turn things over to Wes and Jamie to walk us through the PowerPoint presentation that they've prepared for us tonight. And then at the end, like I said, we'll be reading all the questions and answers. So if you have a question that you think of through the presentation, please type it in, and then we'll address them all at the end.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Sean. So I'm going to take the first part of the presentation, and then Wes will clean up and finish things off. Just to start off, what we've completed so far, project was initiated back in 2021. There was an initial council workshop followed by a technical memorandum that outlined some of the key aspects to be considered as part of the zoning bylaw update. There was a survey conducted and a subsequent technical memorandum completed that provided an overview of some of the responses to that survey. And then most recently, the first draft of the document has been released. That's the purpose of today's meeting, is to provide the public with some of the highlights of the first draft of the official plan and provide an opportunity for some questions and answers as we complete today's exercise. Sean or Wes, sorry. In terms of the reason why the zoning bylaw is being completed, the Planning Act requires that whenever a municipality undertakes an official plan review or updates its official plan, that within 3 years of that exercise, the municipality is also required to update their zoning bylaw. And that's precisely the process that's being undertaken here. The new official plan was adopted in November of 2018 by the Township Council, and then the approval authorities, the County of Simcoe, for the official plan, and the county approved that document in December of 2021. So again, this document is implementing that. This document will repeal and replace the current current zoning bylaw, and it does include a number of modifications to the text to deal with current planning issues, also to implement the new policies that are contained within the official plan. And also there's updates to the zoning schedules to more closely align the zone schedules with the new updated official plan schedules. You'll notice when you review the two documents, both the official plan and zoning bylaw, the structure of the mapping is similar. The official plan is a document that provides policy direction and a snapshot of what the municipality, its land use characteristics will be in the next 20 years. That's what the objective is, where the zoning really recognizes what's on the land today. And you will notice in reviewing the zoning bylaw that there is some new nomenclature in some of the zones, and that nomenclature closely aligns with the nomenclature in the official plan. One example of this is that there's now a greenland zone in the zoning bylaw, which there wasn't in the current zoning bylaw, but that's consistent with the terminology in the official plan. Next slide, Wes. In terms of how the bylaw is structured, there is a user's guide at the outset of the bylaw, which will inform the reader on how to use the bylaw and where to look up their property on the schedules, and then how to navigate through the different sections. I know most people don't use a zoning bylaw until they're proposing to build a new building on their property, either a new house or an accessory building, and that's when the rules come into play. And the bylaws tries to be user friendly to provide a guide to that. There's a number of illustrations and also definitions in the bylaw, which help to guide the user and provide examples of what the bylaw is referring to when it speaks to different yards and how height's measured, for example, and those sorts of things. From the structure of the bylaw, I won't review the whole, the complete structure. A few things I just want to highlight on are section 2 dealing with general provisions. These are provisions that apply to every property in the municipality. So regardless of what zone your property may be in or the property you're interested in, those general provisions could apply. So it's important to review those when evaluating how your property may be used. Section 4 outlines permitted uses, and it's provided in a tabular format. So for each zone, there's a series of permitted uses, and how the bylaw functions is that if the use isn't specifically identified as permitted, then it's not allowed in the bylaw. So the bylaw functions in a permissive context. Section 5 outlines zone standards. So that's the section that establishes what the front yard setback is, how high your building can be, how much lot coverage you can have, those sorts of things. So that's what the zone standards does. And then the remaining sections outline exceptions for unique properties and definitions that apply throughout the bylaw. One point just with respect to exceptions, the current zoning bylaw contains a number of exceptions. We, along with staff at the township, have been through all of the exceptions and identified which ones should be maintained and which ones could be removed. There's a number of instances where structures specific exceptions may have been provided to construct a dwelling or a building at a specific reduced setback or at a specific location on the lot. Once those buildings are constructed, there's really no need for those exceptions moving forward. So there's many instances where we've reduced the number of exceptions in this new bylaw. Wes? This slide intends to provide an overview of the format and the structure of the bylaw. You can see that we've included exceptions in a table format as opposed to the current format. There's a couple of reasons for this. It's very easy to see what additional uses or only what uses are permitted on specific properties and specific zone requirements. It makes it easy to craft amendments to the bylaw, and it makes it easy to update the zoning bylaw. So there's a few administrative tools that we find the tables are quite handy. Wes? One point that's always interesting with the zoning bylaw is how does the bylaw treat existing uses that might predate the passing of the zoning bylaw? And probably everybody's heard of the term grandfathering. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about legal non-conforming uses and legal non-complying structures, is structures that predated the passing of the zoning bylaw. We see a lot of these structures in areas along the shoreline where the current bylaw and even the proposed bylaw propose setbacks that are fairly substantial, where historically development may have been constructed closer to the shoreline than what the bylaws actually permit. So the bylaw does establish specific dates in it for when structures could be considered legal non-complying and where they would be grandfathered. Wes? In terms of transition provisions, and Wes used this term this afternoon, so I'm going to steal it. We tried to establish a principle of fairness in establishing this bylaw, and one of those items of fairness is that if someone had received a minor variance under the current zoning bylaw, basically we've proposed a 5-year grace period under the proposed bylaw, which would allow that variance to stay in effect and they could get their building permit within that 5-year time period. We do think it's important that there is a sunset clause at the end of the day. These things can be difficult from an administration perspective if too much time lapses. So the second area of transition was related to specifically building permits. So if you have that minor variance application, or if you have a site plan application that's been executed, you do have a transition period in which to obtain building permits for those instruments as well. Wes? The other piece of fairness that's been proposed relates to the EP zone boundaries. We wanted to provide a little bit of flexibility in the bylaw with respect to the limits of these boundaries and not require zoning amendments for, we'll call it refinements to those zone boundaries. So for example, if an EP zone boundary crosses an area of a landscape lot adjacent to a house, for example, and an addition's proposed to that house, or a deck is proposed to be added, where justification is provided and where it's obvious that there's no environmental feature in that area, the bylaw does permit refinements to those zone limits without an amending zoning bylaw application to be applied for. There's 4 overlay zones that are proposed to be added to this new zoning bylaw. The first one deals with the Nipissing Ridge, and that's implementing the feature that we've included in the official plan as well. What it establishes is it's basically to ensure that development could proceed in proximity to that Nipissing Ridge or slightly within it, provided that there's clearly no impact on that feature. So provides that there needs to be a review of that feature. It's really kind of like a yield sign or a caution sign that needs to be demonstrated that there won't be any impact prior to development proceeding. Similarly, the next 2 items, wellhead protection area and issues contributing area, those are items that have been included through an amendment to the current zoning bylaw when the municipality undertook a implementation exercise related to the source water protection plan for Lake Simcoe and Southern Georgian Bay. And those policies have been included in the current, those regulations have been included in the current zoning bylaw, and the mapping's also been updated. Again, it's somewhat of a caution sign that says that if you're proposing certain uses within these wellhead protection areas, there may need to be some further review and some site plan control, for example, applied to ensure there's no impact on these wellhead features in order to protect municipal drinking water supplies. That's the focus. And then finally, with the airport, this is an overlay to ensure the proper functioning of the airport. So would apply to uses and the heights of buildings and structures in proximity to the airport. Additional dwelling units. Now you'll see in brackets secondary units. That's the term that's used in the official plan. The province has recently updated the Planning Act of Ontario to allow for up to 2 accessory units within any dwelling unit in a single family home or within a semi-detached unit or row houses, as the case may be. So that's why the terminology's changed to additional dwelling units. What's important from this bylaw's perspective is that additional dwelling units are not permitted in the shoreline zone or the limited service shoreline zone. That implements the policies that are contained in the official plan. And there's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, shoreline areas are areas that exist primarily because of recreational development. And there's also potential concerns with density, intensity of use of properties if secondary units are permitted or additional units are permitted on shoreline properties. And this approach to not permitting additional dwelling units in shoreline properties is an approach that's employed by a number of shoreline municipalities across the province, because there's often lake capacity concerns and those sorts of things related to the servicing of shoreline properties. Additional dwelling units are permitted as of right in most other zones within the zoning bylaw where dwelling units are permitted. There are, however, some standards that are outlined in the zoning bylaw that must be met in order to be able to develop an accessory dwelling unit. And there's also some size limitations associated with them as well. Next slide, Wes. So I think this is where you're taking over, Wes. Oh, you're on mute. There we go.
Thanks, guys. I'll take, I think I have a number of slides to go through, and then we'll get to the questions that people are posting on the Q&A function. Don't forget, if you've got questions, post them there, and once the presentation is done, Sean will moderate and review each of the questions, and either ask Jamie or I or Sean himself will respond to the questions, so that we respond to each and every question that's posted through this open house. The draft bylaw that's currently under consideration proposes no changes to the current prohibition on backyard chickens, both in the zoning bylaw and in the municipality's livestock bylaw as well. And there are a number of reasons that we've done that. If you have reviewed the technical memorandums number 1 and 2, you'll note that we identified to council that if they wish to choose to establish a backyard chicken or an urban chicken program in the municipality, that we recommended that the municipality consider a temporary use bylaw approach to establish a pilot program in the municipality. And subject to the public input that we received tonight, and up to the closing of the comments on the first draft of the public meeting, council may provide further directions to its staff and its project team to reconsider the backyard chicken program, either within this bylaw or in another approach in the municipality. There were a number of concerns that we identified both by the Simcoe County Federation of Agriculture and the Provincial Minister of Agriculture, and the concerns that the backyard chicken programs had on commercial poultry operations in the municipalities. And those, amongst others, were some of the concerns why we thought at this point in time anyways, we would not change the current prohibition, and looking for further public comment and input as we get through and go through this process. This is a new element that we've added into the bylaw for boat docks and boat lifts. This is contained in section 2.4 of the bylaw. Tiny has not previously regulated boat docks or boat lifts, and as a result of some recent court decisions, municipalities are moving into providing zoning regulations for docks in particular. The provisions that are contained in 2.4 set out setbacks for docks as part of a maximum extension into the water. And of course, as you know, as required by the bylaw, you must be the legal owner of the lands where the docks are constructed and connected to the shoreline. The bunkie provisions in the current bylaw are carried forward into the new bylaw, so the provisions and definitions are pretty much left the same. Again, bunkies are not permitted for rental or commercial purposes, much like the existing and current bylaw. However, we've provided clarification in the bylaw that washrooms will be permitted under the new bylaw in bunkies when it's approved by council. You'll note in the bylaw that there is a placeholder in the draft bylaw with respect to cannabis production, and we're looking for and waiting for further council direction. Council has decided to undertake a policy and regulatory review with respect to cannabis production as part of a separate process, and we'll be holding a separate public consultation meeting as part of that as well. You'll note that there is a staff report that's noted here where a preliminary direction for contents for the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment have been identified. But generally, the cannabis production would be permitted in the industrial, agricultural, and rural designations in the official plan, but subject to a zoning bylaw amendment application process and public consultation as a result. So cannabis production would not be permitted based on these preliminary directions as of right in the municipality zoning bylaw. So if you're interested in that aspect of planning regulation and policy in Tiny, you can go to the municipality's website and search that particular staff report and follow along with the process as the municipality considers establishing new policies and regulations for legal cannabis production in the municipality. We've added new definitions and provisions for outdoor residential lighting to the proposed bylaw. And we've included limited regulations requiring dark sky compliant residential lighting in section 222 of the draft bylaw. Municipality have a number of tools that are available to them to regulate outdoor lighting. And we've chosen to, at this point, to include some new provisions for outdoor lighting and looking for public review and public comments on the provisions that we've proposed so far. We've also added new provisions to the proposed bylaw dealing with retaining walls. Currently, the current bylaw does not contain any standards or regulations with respect to retaining walls. We're proposing to establish regulations that will work with the requirements of the Ontario Building Code with respect to when you do or don't need a permit for retaining walls. And the proposed setbacks for the retaining walls that are contained in the new zoning bylaw are based on the height of the proposed wall. So for retaining walls that are less than 1 meter in height, they would be permitted on the property line. For retaining walls that are 1 meter in height or greater, they must meet the setbacks for accessory structures. And these are all set out in section 228 of the new proposed zoning bylaw. The existing bylaw has a number of provisions with respect to steep slopes that are not mapped on the municipality's zoning schedules. This is different than the Nipissing Ridge, which in the new bylaw is a specific overlay zone and has some very specific and detailed regulations. The current bylaw has setback standards from steep slopes, but they are currently defined as 1 to 3 slope, or about 73%. The proposal in the draft bylaw is to establish the same setback, 15 meters from those steep slopes, but for a 3 to 1 slope, or 33%. So any slope that's greater than a 3 to 1 or 33%, all new construction and development will have to be set back 15 meters from that slope. Of course, recognizing that this is imposing a greater standard in the proposed new bylaw. We've included a provision in the bylaw that will allow a lesser setback without an amendment to the bylaw where it's approved by the municipality, and in particular where sufficient technical and/or survey and engineering information is submitted to the town's engineering department for their review and approval, and that would permit the municipality to approve a lesser setback. Storage containers are currently, storage containers or sea containers are currently prohibited in the Township of Tiny, and the proposed bylaw will continue that prohibition in all residential zones. So storage containers as storage structures will be prohibited in the new bylaw, but they will be permitted in other zones for personal use up to a maximum of 3 storage containers, subject to the standard requirements for building permits, building fees, development charges, and of course compliance with all the relevant setbacks of the appropriate zone. Temporary use of storage containers are permitted in residential zones, but associated with construction projects. And as soon as the permit or the construction is complete, the storage container will have to be removed, but they are only permitted to exist on the property up to a maximum of 1 year. I know we had a question this afternoon about applications for the use of sea cans or storage containers for residential dwellings. And if they are part of a building permit application, they could be repurposed for that use, subject to the full requirement of the Ontario Building Code and the zoning bylaw. Typically, that would also require retaining an engineer to confirm the compliance of those repurposed structures to the minimum requirements of the Ontario Building Code. We've all been dealing with the new county waste bins, and in particular in a rural municipality like Tiny, finding locations of those that work for homeowners where they may have longer driveways and where the homes are significantly set back from the roads themselves. We've proposed new provisions in the bylaw to permit encroachments into the required front yard to allow the construction of a storage structure to support this, the keeping of these county waste bins. And so a 3 meter, so this storage structure will be permitted within 3 meters of the front lot line. Again, not within the road allowance, but on the private property. They need to be set back 1 meter from the side lot lines, and a maximum size of 5 square meters is proposed in section 217 of the draft bylaw. And we're looking for comments on whether we've got these proposed regulations right, whether we need to make further refinements to recognize that we've gone to this new county waste bin system. You'll see, much like the cannabis production, the draft bylaw has a placeholder for short-term rental regulations. And we will update the bylaw once council direction with respect to short-term rentals has been provided. For those of you that haven't been following along, council has established a specific task force who's been requested to develop a comprehensive response to short-term rentals, and that task force includes local residents and members of council and staff as well. Once the task force reports back to council and the proposed direction, both a policy and regulatory one, the bylaw will be updated based on those decisions of council and appropriately amended to reflect those directions from council. If you're looking for more information with respect to the short-term rental work that's currently underway in the municipality, we've provided the link to in the municipality's website for short-term rentals. There are 2 new zone categories, the EP1 and EP2 in the zoning bylaw. The EP1 zone recognizes the provincially significant wetlands that are designated environmental protection in the new official plan. The EP2 zone includes all other evaluated wetlands and any other wetland in the municipality that is 2 hectares or greater. For both of the EP1 and EP2 zones, buildings and structures and site alteration are not permitted. The EP2 zone does not have a specific setback that's required to it. There is a setback of, I believe, 30 meters to the EP1 zone that's contained in the draft bylaw. And I think, as Jamie had indicated earlier, we've included a provision in the bylaw that allows refinements to the EP2 zone without amendment to the bylaw, subject to sufficient information being submitted to the municipality and the township approving that. There is a new zoning zone in the municipality that reflects the Greenlands designation in the official plan, and that's the GL zone. It excludes all the wetlands that are contained within the Greenlands designation, but it includes all other lands that are designated Greenlands in the official plan. And recognizing that this is a major new initiative in the official plan included a limited range of uses that would be permitted as of right within the Greenland zone. And that's what we've carried forward into the new zoning bylaw. So the GL zone permits and recognizes existing uses as legal uses, and it would also permit the construction of new single detached residential dwellings and accessory uses that go along with that residential dwelling as of right within the GL zone. One of the major changes with respect to performance standards in the bylaw relates to the interior side yard setbacks, particularly in the shoreline residential zone, where the new proposed interior side yard setback for new dwellings is 3 meters on one side and 1.8 meters on the other side. And that does not change based on the number of stories. If you're at all familiar with the existing bylaw, you'll know that there's a step back provision that as the height of the building increases, you're required to be set back further from the side lot lines. And we removed that for a number of reasons, particularly because it was resulting in significant increases in height of dwellings within the shoreline area. There is a provision in the proposed bylaw that would allow attached garages and carports to encroach into the 1.8 meter side lot line up to 1 meter, subject to meeting the requirements of the zoning bylaw. We've added new provisions to the bylaw to regulate the location of private sports courts in the municipality. So tennis courts, pickleball courts, basketball courts, etc. So this is a new provision and there's a new definition. And the requirement in the bylaw is that the location of new sports courts must meet the same setback standards that are established for accessory structures within the applicable zone. And there's also some specific fencing and lighting provisions related to private sports courts that are contained within the proposed bylaw as well. As I indicated earlier, one of the issues that we identified in the review of the current bylaw, in particular, a review of the historic minor variances and building permits, was that the height of buildings was, particularly in the shoreline area, was beginning to creep up. And so the current bylaw defines maximum building height as the midpoint between the peak and eaves of the slanted or sloped roof structure. And what we've proposed in the new bylaw is to define maximum height as the highest point of the roof structure, which we think is complementary to some of the other changes that we've made in the bylaw that will help control the massing and built form of structures within the shoreline area in the municipality. So that's our very brief presentation, which I think captures some of the major new items in the bylaw and the highlights of the bylaw. The next steps in this process, we're looking for, in addition to the comments that we'll be considering shortly, but comments can continue to be submitted to the municipality by March 17th. And those that are submitted to the new zoning bylaw at tiny.ca email address, those will be considered when we look at the first public draft of the bylaw and consider further refinements to it. That will lead us to prepare a what we heard report and recommended revisions to the draft bylaw that will then go to council for their instructions and directions to the project team. The next step of the process obviously is the scheduling of the statutory public meeting where additional public input and comments can be received. And then the last step of the process is to prepare the bylaw for consideration and passing by council. So I think that wraps up the presentation, Sean. Just a reminder to everybody, the email address for the project is listed here. The project webpage and the webpage address is located here as well. And if you want to continue to receive, and you haven't done it yet, go to Tiny Connect and include the new Tiny zoning bylaw as one of your preferences, so that any notice and all notices with respect to the new zoning bylaw project will be provided to you through that service at the Tiny Connect service. So I think that's it, Sean, for the formal presentation, and we're ready for the questions and comments.
That's great. Thanks, Wes and Jamie, for that presentation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through each one of the questions. If there's some questions, I noticed there's a lot of questions, a lot of interest in the first session too, with regards to backyard chickens and why there are no provisions in the new bylaw with regards to that. Wes did touch on that, so we will. The first question here deals with that, but if we're answering the same question, we'll skip over the same ones. Similarly, like Wes mentioned, with regards to the short-term rental, I know there's a lot of interest in the township right now with regards to that issue. And that task force is working towards making recommendations to council on that. So we're not going to be answering specific questions on the short-term rental task force and the work that they're doing. We just recommend folks that they go to the short-term rental webpage that the township has, which has all the agendas, the minutes, and all the live stream YouTube feed for all the meetings, and all the information can be found in one location there. So. Okay, so I'll start off. First question. I would like to know why the results of the public survey are being cherry-picked. Specifically, why are the 68% of residents in favor of backyard chickens being dismissed when other favorable survey results are being proceeded with? Included in the draft bylaw updates requiring residents to further demonstrate their support by email. Seems unjust and a waste of both residents' time and township resources. Wes, you touched on this a little bit in the presentation as to the reasons why we didn't include it. So maybe if you just want to reiterate that and then provide any other information with regards to that. I see a number of other questions with regards to the backyard chicken. So this will be, we'll try to provide a fulsome response here.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. If anyone had a chance to review the earlier reports that were prepared as part of this process, we identified a number of issues with respect to the backyard chickens. And we did recommend to council that if they wanted to proceed with a backyard chicken or urban chicken program, that they may want to consider a temporary use bylaw approach and a regulatory or licensing bylaw approach as well as an option to consider. We felt based on our environmental scan, our review of what's happening out there in other municipalities and what are the concerns, if you will, with respect to backyard chickens, that we would not include it in the draft bylaw at this time, but that's subject to public review and comment and continued support for the request that we would go back to council and seek their direction instructions as to how they want to proceed. Do they want to proceed by way of including it in this bylaw? Do they want to include, as we originally had recommended, to include it in a temporary use bylaw approach and licensing bylaw approach? All of these would require concurrent amendments to the municipalities. And Sean, I'm going to call it the livestock bylaw, but there's another bylaw that currently regulates the keeping of livestock in residential zones in the municipality, and it would require amendments to that bylaw as well if council choose to go that route. And so, the purpose of this public meeting is to test the proposal within the new zoning bylaw to get public comment and input on it. And if the direction is clear, then we'll discuss this with council and seek their further instructions on how they want us to proceed. It's not been, it's not been eliminated, if you will, at this point. It's just not been included in this draft bylaw. And subject to the comments from the public, we'll canvass council and see where they want us to go.
Thanks for that fulsome response, Wes. I actually just want to note, just doing a scan of the participants, although this is not a council meeting, we do have a member of council with us this evening. Councillor Cindy Hastings is in attendance, listening to the conversation and the questions and answers. So thank you, Councillor Hastings, for joining us tonight. We also have our Chief Municipal Law Enforcement Officer, Stephen Harvey. He's the one that's tasked with enforcing this bylaw once it is enforced in effect, and he's also listening to the questions and answers. So thank you, Mr. Harvey, for joining us as well. Next question. If I type in Plan 83 Park part lot 325. I can answer this. I think what this question is referring to is searching the interactive zoning map by typing in a legal description. That is not an option when you're searching a property. There's only two options. One is to type in the address of the property, and like I noted in the demonstration, if there is no address of the property, you can type in the roll number, and you can find the roll number on your tax bill. It's the number that starts with 4368, and then it's quite a long number. But if you type that in, the tool will bring you to the property. Okay, here's a question. We have another one on backyard chickens. I'll just bypass that one based on Wes's response. Are there any disadvantages, drawbacks when we live at a lot now greenbelt, which will be declared EP2 under the new bylaw? There will still be all town services, etc. It would just not be possible to build any new structure in the future, question mark.
Do you want me to take that one, Jamie? The one unique things about zoning bylaws is that they don't act retroactively. So if you have an existing property with existing buildings and structures on that property, if the property is rezoned to EP2, then your existing structures would be legal non-conforming and or legal non-complying, and they would continue to be permitted on the property. We indicated in the presentation that recognizing that that through the official plan and the zoning bylaw is not an exact science of defining the location of the EP1 or the EP2 zone lines, that we've included a provision that allows some refinement of those lines, in particular the EP2 line, through the production of additional information or site inspections. I know Sean and his team is working with the Severn Sound Environmental Association on the process and procedure for how the municipality will allow and undertake the refinements of the EP2 zones. So it's not necessarily that you would not be permitted to construct a new structure, but there would need to be a direct discussion with the municipality around those questions. And I'm going to suggest, Janine, that if you can send us an email to the new tiny bylaw at new zoning bylaw at tiny.ca with the specific address for the property, we can look into it a little bit further and provide you a more detailed response with respect to your particular property.
Thanks, Wes. Next question is, how or why does an area acquire the EP2 standard? Is it possible to know what exactly is being protected and boundaries of the area? I can take this question. So just similar to what Wes was just talking about, maybe just a little bit of background. When the township prepared the new official plan, we had the Severn Sound Environmental Association prepare a comprehensive natural heritage study, which mapped all features, including significant woodlands, significant valley lands, and as well as other wetlands, which is a specific direction from the province for us to map those specific areas. So there's two EP categories. There's an EP1, which is a provincially significant woodland. That mapping comes specifically from the province through the Ministry of Natural Resources. And then the EP2 zone, that specifically relates to the other wetlands. And that was done through aerial image interpretation and review. So we know that we didn't get all of those EP2 zones correct, and that's why we've set up a refinement process that does not require owners to do site-specific zoning amendments to refine that EP2 zone category. For example, if an EP2 zone is on somebody's landscape lawn and it's very clear that it's incorrect, refinements can be made to correct those situations. Next question, our property is on GL. Is it buildable?
Do you want me to take that, or?
Sure.
So the zoning bylaw, if you have a look at the permitted uses table in the zoning bylaw under GL, which is Greenlands, it does identify that a dwelling unit is a permitted use on those existing vacant lots. So there is an opportunity within a vacant lot that's proposed to be zone GL to construct a dwelling and an accessory buildings on them.
Thanks, Jamie. We have another backyard chicken question, but I believe that's been answered at this point. Here's one. Why is there no wellhead protection for the aquifer providing water to shoreline areas?
Maybe I'll take that just because I was involved with the source protection implementation documents. So specifically what's included in the wellhead protection areas is specifically related to municipal drinking water supplies. And the reason for that is that the legislation, so the Clean Water Act, specifically applies to municipal drinking water supplies. It doesn't apply to individual wells. So what we've done is really here implement the official plan policies and the official plan mapping that relates to source water protection. So that's the short and the long answer of it. Is it's municipal water supplies, and it flows from the Clean Water Act through to the source protection plan into the official plan, and then ultimately implemented through the bylaw. So it's a municipal drinking water supply issue.
Thanks, Jamie. Next question, can you please define what gross floor area is?
I'll take this one if I can, Sean. I can refer Justine to page 7109 of the draft bylaw. And this is in the letter F section of the bylaw. Unfortunately, there are actually 3 terms that are related to floor area. And so you'll find the definition for floor area gross or gross floor area in that section on that page of the bylaw. Take a look at it. There are 3 different terms for floor area, and there's different gross floor area. So take a look at those, Janine, and if you have any further questions after you've looked at that, let us know, please.
Thanks, Wes. Next question, I may have missed a section in your presentation regarding beach ownership and beach property lines. Thank you for your reply. So I can take this. So we actually didn't speak to beach ownership and beach property lines in the presentation, because it's not an issue, or it's not an item that's dealt with in the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw does not define boundaries of properties. That's a legal matter. The zoning bylaw only deals with land use. Anything else to add to that, Jamie or Wes?
No, I guess the only thing would be that if someone's interested in understanding which property line is their front property line or their rear property line or interior side property line, there's specific definitions in the bylaw that refer to, and you'd go to lot line first. So it says lot line front, lot line side, lot line rear. And from that, you can determine what your required setbacks are for accessory buildings and principal buildings.
And the illustrations in the user's guide of the bylaw that shows you in relation to a number of different typical lots where the front, rear, side, etc. of the property is.
Good point, yes.
Thanks, guys. Backyard chicken question, which I believe we've answered. You have a short-term rental question. Again, please visit the Township Attorney webpage with regards to short-term rentals to get all the updated information relative to the task force work. Issues contributing areas. With respect to legally existing and municipally serviced hamlet residential zones, please advise how this newly included overlay will impact a property owner's ability to obtain a building permit and install a septic system suitable for residential purposes.
I can take that. So the mapping that's included within the source protection planning documents and then implemented through the zoning bylaw is not focused on residential development. It's focused on non-residential development and non-residential uses. So your ability to obtain a septic system permit, provided it complies with the Ontario Building Code, it wouldn't affect your ability to obtain a septic system.
Yeah, Jamie, we've included a very specific provision which comes right out of the source protection plan that says for lots of record that exist on the date of the approval of the source protection plan, a small on-site sewage system is permitted. So that's reflected in the proposed bylaw as well.
Perfect.
Thanks, guys. Next question, what is RU zone mean? I can take that. The RU zone is the rural zone, and that would be mapped in compliance with the township official plan also being rural. So if you're interested in seeing the permitted uses or zone standards in the RU zone, please review the text of the zoning bylaw. And if you have any questions, please let us know. Referring to the notice of today's meeting, would you kindly provide complete clarity around what one needs to do in order to preserve the right to appeal the new zoning bylaw or become party to an appeal? Where one has no need to comment on the current draft, there may be a need to comment on subsequent draft when short-term accommodation provisions are included.
Me to take that? So in order to preserve your appeal rights, one would have to comment on the zoning bylaw. It could be the first draft, it could be the second draft, it could be at any point leading up to and including the public meeting. What is also important, however, which has changed, is that in order to be notified of the decision of council with respect to the bylaw, an individual has to specifically request to be notified of that decision. So if you want to be notified of this decision, you should make that request to either the web page or to the clerk that you would like to be notified of this specific decision. So to summarize, as long as you provide comments throughout the process, you would have the ability to appeal.
Thanks, Jamie. So just to be clear, Robert doesn't need to provide comment on this draft one, if there's no need to, but future draft, if he would like to, he should provide comments on that draft. Perfect, thank you. I was unable to hear the answer provided to my question when I was, will I be able to receive access to Answers video for review, follow up any objections? Great question. We had this in the first session as well. What we're going to try to do is have both recordings of the first and second presentation available on the project page so that they're available to the public. Okay, backyard chickens.
I think I just want to speak to one point there. It was
Oh, sure.
It was an item that just, I think one portion of that was, why have they not received any comments on the comments that have been provided? So an individual's provided feedback on the process and they haven't got a response to their comment. Just in terms of how this process typically unfolds, is that individual responses to each comment aren't provided as they come in. However, what we are undertaking is preparing a comment summary table that outlines all the comments that are provided in writing through this process, provides a response to those comments, and that gets included in the staff report that ultimately goes along with the bylaw to council. So there's a clear understanding of the relationship between the comments and how they've been considered, and ultimately what changes have been made or not made with respect to the bylaw. So you shouldn't expect a reply to every email that you send in on this, but we can assure you that they're being tracked and they're being included in a comment summary table.
Thanks, Jamie. And just for everybody's knowledge, once you do submit a comment to the project email address, you will get an auto response, which means we've received it, and it will be included in the review. if it's a question or clarification, you will get a response back from us on those types of questions. Next question, why are tourist establishments not permitted in shoreline zones?
Want me to take that one, Jamie? So the tourist establishments, as defined by the zoning bylaw, existing ones are recognized within the proposed new bylaw. But the establishment of new ones, the policy framework is set out in the official plan, and it would require an application to amend the zoning bylaw to establish new tourist establishments in the municipality through that application process and in accordance with the policy guidance that's contained within the official plan. So we're typically not in the habit of pre-zoning properties for new uses. It is an application-driven process, and it would be up to the property owner to determine whether they wanted to proceed with an application of that basis.
Thanks, Wes. The township's new official plan states conditions for a second dwelling unit. However, none of the restrictions contained in the township's new zoning bylaw section 2.2 are contained here. Why?
I will take that. So in terms of second dwelling units, the OP does, the official plan does contain policies that provide some direction to the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw does include in section 2.2 a number of regulations that do apply to secondary dwelling units or additional dwelling units. I keep getting that terminology mixed up, but it's additional dwelling units. So there is a number of restrictions and limitations included in the zoning bylaw that flow from those greater policies in the official plan.
We do have a question about another one about backyard chickens. They specifically ask about what the concerns are around backyard chickens. Wes, I believe you touched upon that already with regards to that.
Sure. And just to list, if you will, the concerns that were identified based on our best practices review, questions around legal non-conforming use, agricultural community concerns, animal disease, costs, public health, and groundwater concerns. One of the things that we found very clearly in our review was that many of the municipalities that were permitting backyard chickens like Guelph, Toronto, Kitchener were municipalities that were provided with full municipal water and full municipal sewers. And obviously Tiny, not having that benefit, relies on groundwater for all of its drinking water supply, both municipal systems and private systems. And obviously concerns about allowing additional backyard chickens, if you will, in residential zones, particularly where the lots are smaller. The lots are side by side. There was a potential concern for groundwater impacts, and those were part of the thinking why, at least at this point, we had not included it as a general permission in the proposed new bylaw. But again, subject to community and public input, it is something that we will go back to council with and seek their instruction and direction as to how they want to proceed.
Thanks, Wes. The next one's with regards to short-term rental question again. This is something we're not dealing with tonight. That's not the purpose of tonight's meeting, but we will, because there's a task force that's specifically working on that project. Next question, can Blue Water Beach Dunes be declared as zone EP2?
I can maybe take that question. EP2 zone currently, as Sean mentioned, reflects other wetlands. That's not to say it couldn't include other environmental features. So if there are features that individuals would like included in the EP2 zone, they can certainly provide comments to that effect, and we could review those comments and consider whether it would be appropriate or not to include those features. We can't provide you with an absolute yes or no tonight, but it's certainly something that we could look at.
Thanks, Jamie. Isn't putting a fence into the water a bylaw issue and should be included into the zoning bylaw?
Who wants to take that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't have a quick answer for that one. That may be one that we actually have to think about some more and provide a response at a later stage. Certainly, the new bylaw is including provisions for the first time for docks and boat lifts, but is a fence a structure? Is a fence something that's particularly in the, that's located in the water? Is that something that's regulated by the zoning bylaw? It's something I don't have a quick answer for, Sean, unfortunately.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks, Wes.
I can just confirm that some bylaws do include provisions related to fence, but often it's left to a fence bylaw, which is enacted under the Municipal Act. But certainly something, as Wes mentioned, could be or should be looked at in more detail.
Yeah, I can confirm that the current zoning bylaw deals with the height of a fence, not with regards to the specific location on a property, unless
Certainly
we're
not in the water and not in water.
not in the water. Yeah, where we don't have jurisdiction. Were detached dwellings not allowed on the previous EP2 lands that are now zone GL? So maybe I can answer that question. So if you had a property that was previously zoned, we didn't have an EP, we don't have an EP2 zone in the current bylaw. We have an EP1 zone in the current bylaw. The current EP1 zone in the current bylaw deals with all wetlands. And through the detailed mapping that was done through the Severn Sound Environmental Association, it's true that additional lands have now been zoned with an EP, but I will say that there are other properties in the township that were historically zoned EP1 that are now zoned greenlands because it was determined that there's no wetland feature on those properties. So in the current bylaw, if you have a property that's EP1 and you would not be allowed to build a dwelling, if you're going to be zoned GL or greenlands in the new bylaw, you would be allowed to build a dwelling on that property. Okay, here's a question. One last question. Is it possible to have our property excluded from the zoning change, or is there nothing we can do? And then in brackets, from Greenbelt to Greenlands and mostly EP2.
Maybe I'll respond to that one, Sean. Janine submits comments to the website and very specifically asks us to look at the zoning of the property. We can do that as part of this process right now. Obviously, we're guided by the designations in the new official plan that's been recently approved, finally approved by the county in December of last year. But based on the comments that we receive, we can look at it and see whether there's some refinement that can happen at this stage in the process.
And just to that point, it may be helpful if you could provide some evidence to the effect of why it shouldn't be included as EP2, for example, if you've got photographic evidence or any information you can provide that details what you believe a more appropriate zone should be for that parcel.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, and just another point with this one. If your property is currently zoned greenbelt, it will be likely going to green lands. That's not, that is in compliance with the new official plan, because the new official plan does not have a green belt designation, but it has a green lands designation. But yeah, please send us an email with regards to any information you have with regards to the EP2, because like I said earlier, we didn't get all of them correct, and there is a refinement process we can, and if we can deal with it before the bylaws pass, then we can definitely do that. Some more questions, comments about backyard chickens. We definitely got a lot of comments in the first session about that too. So please send an email to our project webpage, and we'll definitely include those comments to council and report back. Where do I find regulations on boat lifts showing up on the shoreline?
So
that's section 2.4 of the draft bylaw. And if you go to the project website on the municipality's website, you can download a copy of the proposed bylaw. And if you look in section 2.4, docks and boat lift regulations are contained in there.
Thanks, Wes. Down to our last question. If you have any other questions, please type them in now. On your map earlier, you wrote homes that were built with apartments prior to 1977. Is this grandfather in, and can the apartment be a rental? Can you clarify? I think that might be helpful to have us to maybe provide us with an email with the specifics around this specific one. But just generally speaking, if this bylaw is approved with the new legal non-conforming, non-complying date of 1977, if an owner can prove that a use has existed before that date, it would be considered grandfathered.
And
Please
it
send-
and it
Sorry, go ahead,
continued.
Jamie.
Sorry, and it continued. It can't just have existed. It would need to have been a continuous use.
Correct. Yes. Thanks, Jamie.
And Sean, just to add to that, where the zoning is resolved. So for example, if the use was determined to be legal non-conforming and continued, it may be recognized by the new bylaw, but to make it fully legal, you may need to get the appropriate permits under the Ontario Building Code to bring that unit in compliance with the minimum safety standards for rental accommodation. So that may be something that through that additional email, we can provide a more detailed response.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wes. Good point. We have no more questions. Wes, maybe while we're just wrapping up, if you want to share your screen and just show the project email address for everybody, just as a follow-up, so we can get all questions going to the correct spot.
So the email address is newzoningbylaw@tiny.ca.
And I just see another question come in with regards to backyard chickens. So if Paulette, if you've already emailed us with regards to this, it will be included in the review back to council. So along with all the other ones that we've received. So you've already done that. You've done everything you can with regards to the review of draft 1 of this new bylaw. One more question. When waterfront owner wants to build new decks close to water, there's bylaw and setbacks. So why won't fencing be considered in the bylaw rules? So it's definitely something like Wes and Jamie have said that we're going to work. That's something that we will review and take back. I see Wes making notes there. So we will look at that to see if we can put something or if it's appropriate to recommend something to council in the next review. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. give everybody another minute if there's any other questions. But I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight and participating in the preparation and review of the new bylaw. You know, all comments and questions are important to us, and if there's things that we've missed or we can make things better in the next draft, we'd appreciate those comments and questions coming in, so we can think about those things before the bylaw gets finalized and gets put in front of council. So any comments and questions, please let us know. We have one more question here. Will there be a public input on the next draft? Yes, there will be. So the next steps will be, we'll be reporting back to council with all the comments and questions we've received. Please get us, if you haven't done so already, please email your comments to the project webpage, or sorry, to the project email before the end of next week.
March
And it will
17th.
be March 17th, and it will be included in the review of the draft 1, and then we'll be reporting back to council. When we do prepare draft 2, we will be having a public meeting at that stage, and yes, that will be an opportunity for the public to provide input. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think we can wrap up for tonight, and yeah, please let us know if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks.